it's Ivy Slater, and you're listening to Her Success Story Podcast, a show where gutsy businesswomen share their success journey. Hi, it's Ivy Slater with a new episode of Her Success Story. Listeners, thank you for joining me here today. Subscribers, welcome back. I have an amazing woman joining me here today. I'm fortunate to be connected to Clare Hart. So Clare is currently the CEO of Williams Lee, which is a skilled business outsourcing firm that I'm sure she'll share a little bit about. Prior to this, she was the former chief executive officer and member of the board of directors for Sterling Talent Solution. While at Sterling, she doubled the company's size. Prior to Sterling, she was CEO board member of Infogroup and an executive vice president prior to that at Dow Jones. Claire is a smart woman, but what I actually adore about Claire is she's a real woman. You could sit down and have a great conversation. And I know today's episode of Her Success Story, you're going to be wanting to have some pens and paper, because every so often she just drops these brilliant bombs and it's like, oh my God, I have to write that down. That's fabulous. Claire, welcome. Thanks for joining me here today.
Ivy, thank you so much for having me. I'm so delighted to be here.
So tell us a little bit about, I'll always say it's interesting. We get started in a career and, you know, we're young women, young girls, young men, and we have all these visions for ourselves. What were your visions when you were young, and how did you end up doing what you do today? Because you're a woman who makes amazing impact.
Well, thank you for that. I wish I could say I knew the roadmap I was going to take, and I would absolutely, I had it all laid out, but I didn't. The only thing I knew was that I loved technology. I wanted to be a technologist. I was a computer programmer. That was my first job out of college. And there was something in me as an 18, 19-year-old that said, you've got to understand technology. You have to understand computers because they're going to be part of your life. And I'm so glad that I did. And I had that insight at that age, because then I pursued the career in technology and schooling technology. But I knew I wasn't going to be a computer programmer for my life. I knew I wanted that foundation. But after I went to school and worked on my MBA at night, so I finished undergrad with computer systems management, a business degree, and then my MBA at night, I was moved into the advanced systems group. So we worked on new technologies at the time. And then that became an opportunity for me to move into product development. So I moved into product development. And while I was in product development and working with third-party software developers, my husband was relocated out to Michigan. And so I was the trailing spouse. And I went not knowing where I was going to work. I knew I'd get a job, but I wasn't sure where I was going to work. And I got an opportunity to go into sales. And Ivy, this was probably one of the bigger risks in my career, but I took it. And I will say I had mitigation plans. My husband was in sales training, and the company I was going to work with, I knew them. They were partners of Dow Jones, where I had just left being a product manager and a partner manager. So the risk was mitigated, but it was a terrific experience. It was a huge learning curve. One of the most difficult jobs I think I've ever done, because sales is hard work. It's a lot of glory, but it's a lot of hard work. And then I'll just fast forward. I'm
actually going to jump in here for a sec, Claire. I have to say, every young person and every business man and woman who has an opportunity to learn the skills of sales and the value of relationship development is a great foundation of building leadership and building your career forward.
I completely agree with you. And I give that counsel to young people all the time. If there's an opportunity to do account management or sales, do it. Because you will learn more about business. You'll also learn more about yourself in roles like sales and account management than any other role, no matter what your skill set. You can always go back to being a programmer or an accountant. But if you have an opportunity and you have the desire, take a risk, go for it.
Agreed.
So anyway, I was giving a little bit of my background and I can come back to it. But the point is when I didn't have it all laid out. I was lucky and I also was willing to take risks. And I urge every young person, every career person to think about this. Sometimes it's a lateral move. It's not a promotion. So while I was out in Michigan in sales, 4 years into it, I was asked to come back to the New York area to run product marketing. And it was a lateral move, but it was a right move because it also prepared me for my next role, which was running global sales for a joint venture, Factiva. And then that positioned me well to be appointed chief executive of Factiva when the first CEO decided to leave and follow a dot-com dream. So all the movement from technology to product to partner relations to sales and then product marketing, really, there's a lot of risks involved there. There's so much learning and as a result, so much opportunity. So that was my career path. And I will say there are plenty of other people that I admire who are very focused and they stay in sales their entire career and they're awesome salespeople. So each person has to look at their own interests and desires to determine what's right for them. But if you have a temptation to go try another function, go for it. You have nothing to lose.
What are some of the things that have surprised you in the career you've built for yourself?
Well, one thing that did surprise me was, I said sales was one of the most difficult roles. Actually, marketing was very difficult as well. Now, part of that might have been that the person I reported to used to be the head of marketing for the Wall Street Journal. And so, you're working for someone who's had your job, could probably do it in their sleep. So that's always a challenge for people and shouldn't be a surprise, but it is something to think about when you're taking on your next role. Did your boss have that job that you're going for? Because it does change the dynamics a little. You'll learn a ton, but you'll also feel probably a little more pressure because they've been there and done that. So that was a surprise. It's in some ways, Ivy, every day there's a surprise of some sort, or every week there's a surprise of some sort. So I think it would raise another point for your listeners, especially women who are starting out in their career or moving into management, and that is about resiliency. And so surprises are not always good. In fact, probably half of them are bad. And so you have to sort of be unemotional looking at an unpleasant surprise and think about how am I going to respond to this instead of reacting, and stay calm and then think about problem solving. How do I solve this? How do I manage through this? And how do I guide the people around me in managing through this?
And it's very true what you say. And so, just like we have percentages everywhere, right? 50-50, some surprises are good and some are clearly not. And what's interesting is I always say, and I have a strong belief that opportunity is everywhere.
Yes.
It's for us to be open to see it. So sometimes when a detour or a surprise shows up for you, are you willing to stay in that calm place versus the reactionary place? And I love how you're sharing that because it's so true. Because when you don't react, when you can stay in the unemotion, you have the ability to then see, is there an opportunity that's developing from what was unexpected?
That's right. That's exactly right.
So tell me some of the challenges in building a career. It sounds like both you and your husband have both been on this path that you're both advancing, traveling, moving, grooving. What are some of the challenges that you have seen for yourself and that you can share a little bit with others so we raise awareness around?
I mean, this is kind of an interesting one, and depending upon the way the audience feels about it. But I remember when I first became my first CEO role, I became chief executive of Factiva. It was a joint venture between Dow Jones and Reuters. And I was just, figuring it out, Ivy. There was no roadmap, right? But one of the things I found myself doing was working all the time, and I wasn't working out. And I have a very strong view today, and it's probably stronger today than it was then, but I have a very strong view that you have to work out for physical purposes, of course, but it's so much about mental health as well today. So I said, I've got to work out 2 days a week. If I don't work out during the week, at least on weekends, I have to work out 2 days a week. And then I started ratcheting it up, and I got it to 5 days a week, and I'm hovering around 5-6 days a week, 5 days a week now. And I that's a challenge, because if you're not taking care of yourself physically, no matter what your job is, there are other consequences to it. And I don't think you're as effective as an executive. So that was one challenge that I worked through.
I think it's so true. And it's not just about our physical stamina. And, as you're growing a career, if you're growing a business, we need to be physically strong.
Absolutely.
And it's the mental bandwidth that's so important. And that's working out, that's taking, it could be a little bit of meditation time, gratitude time, whatever is your thing.
Exactly. Just me time, whatever it happens to be, just make sure you take that me time and we time, like with your partner, your spouse, your family. I think it's important to not become one-dimensional. It's easy to do that. And when you have a high intensity job, you have to make sure you find time to compartmentalize that quality downtime.
So, did you always see yourself as a woman leader, a woman CEO? Was this a vision you had for yourself?
It's kind of funny. I always saw myself as a woman leader. I don't know that I thought about being a CEO until I was presented with the opportunity. And so it wasn't as though I said to myself, I absolutely want to be CEO. I wanted to be part of a dynamic organization where I can contribute and where I'm growing and I'm learning. But I always felt a strong leadership responsibility. In fact, somebody asked me this question just last week: when did you know you were a leader? And I had to think about it, but I thought about it. It's sort of like it emerges when you're in junior high. 7th and 8th grade, you start to realize, I don't want to say people are following, but people are responding, and they're coming along with you, and that's some of the toughest times in kids' lives. But I think
they're horrendous.
But I think
I'm not going to mince words there.
No, but I think that's when I started to feel it. And then, as you get on, you just accumulate skills as a leader. And then, of course, your first management responsibility in a business environment is a true test. And then I also have a very strong view that modeling the behavior of people you respect is a really good way to develop as a leader. So I would see people that I respect, and I would be like, I want to be like that. For example, the chairman of the board at Sterling, when I joined the company, he was masterful at asking questions. He never said, Claire, this is what you should do. He would say, Claire, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? What do you think about this? And it was an amazing leadership quality that I always ask a lot of questions, so it's natural, but just observing the impact of asking a question and letting the person respond with their idea versus you telling them what to do. That's a leadership style that, emulating behavior that you like. And similarly, I look at people that I don't respect, and I'm never going to yell at someone in the hallway. I'm never going to lambaste people in front of their colleagues. And so I think from a leadership perspective, you develop your skills, you read a lot, you go to classes, but there's a lot of observation that causes you to become the leader you are.
And I think you have to be willing to observe. So we could, show up every day and do our jobs, or we could show up and truly observe and craft who do we want to be in the long run. And this goes for the career ladies who are listening, as well as for the business women. You know, there's great ways to actually stay in the power of observation and the gifts that give us.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right.
Did you have a mentor along the way? Or has there been any type of mentorship for you?
I wouldn't say there was ever a formal mentor, but there were people that were definitely mentors in my life that I knew were supporters and were extremely helpful. The woman who I mentioned earlier, who was the head of marketing at the Wall Street Journal, she was on the board of Factiva when I was appointed to chief executive. And she was someone I very much respected. And so she was someone that, you know, when I think of a mentor, I think of someone that you go to and you kind of talk through issues. We never did all that. We were just business women, and we talked about the right way to do things. And I learned a ton from her. So when I think of mentors, I think of her. Also a person at Dow Jones who ran sales. He was extraordinary as a leader. And I would say if you asked, you know, sort of everybody on the sales team and certain people in the other people in the company that interacted with him, they would say he was a mentor of sorts to them. And that was just his natural instinct to help and to coach people. He was a coach by, you know, he was an athlete to begin with, and then he was definitely a coach. So he was someone, she was someone, the chairman of Sterling that I mentioned. So there wasn't a formal program, or a formal mentor program, but I've definitely had the benefit of some amazing executives in my life that have really helped me, guided me.
Is there any significant relationship? So I personally talk about the value of relationships, and I truly think the value of great relationships in business is what the key to success is. Has there been, in your journey as a businesswoman, relationships that say, wow, this has been pivotal in what I've learned from that, or still in touch with also?
Oh, yeah. Individual relationships. Well, the man that I mentioned that was chairman of Sterling, I'm definitely still close with him. And that was a pivotal relationship. He was so smart. Plus he had a great style. The other thing is, I found that he was a person when I was running into something that was really challenging. Even when he was no longer on the board, I would call him and I would say, I just need to bounce this off you. What do you think? And so I would say and Sterling was an amazing opportunity for me and a great 5 years. And, you know, we did so much there. And so all the relationships mattered. The relationships you have for me, the CFO, the general counsel, with the head of sales, with, you know, head of account development. To me, it's the relationships you have with the board. It's the relationships you have with the executives on your leadership team, your peers. Every relationship needs to be cared for one way or the other. Either you care for it and you nurture it and it grows, or you figure out how to end it and exit it, because that takes energy if you keep a bad relationship alive. But you have to put all your energy into the good relationships and to the focusing forward.
So just curious, and we have just finished up a series on the impact of women in the boardroom and women on boards. So having been CEO and been on boards in your career, you're just curious on what you see of the issue of women on boards, more women in the boardroom. Any observations or lessons?
Well, I mean, the first thing I would say is I'm obviously very well aware of the fact that companies that have diversity in their leadership team, in their employee base, and on their board are more successful than companies that don't. So that's a fact. Those numbers, there's data that supports that. So I'm a huge advocate for diversity on my own executive teams. I try to get 30, 50% female, if I can. The best I've done is 50%. I was happy with 30%, but I think it's really important for so many reasons to have that level of diversity. I think it's going to take a while to change, Ivy. And I had my own experience last summer. I was talking with a recruiter, and he was recruiting for 3 board seats on a company and on a company board. And he said, I'm talking to you, and I'm talking to this person, and I'm talking to that person. And they were friends and colleagues who had become friends. And I was like, oh, this is great. It would be fun to be on a board with this person and that person. And then it clicked. This is what happens every day, and why so many boards are not diverse, because the people that get the phone call, can you recommend someone, or who would you like to be on this board? Who brings this skill? They bring their closest friends and colleagues. And if it's a group of men, it's often men that they bring on board. So I think that's unfortunate, but I understand it a little better now after that experience. By the way, I didn't join that board. But the point is, I think that we have to seek out women professionals for these board seats. And we have to make sure, other members of the board have to make sure they're invited into the discussion, because sometimes women either won't say anything because they feel like someone's already said it. And we all know that very often things get repeated, and so it's okay to repeat things. Or they won't say anything because maybe they won't jump over the words of somebody else that's talking, and then the conversation moves on. So I think sometimes women need to be more outspoken, and then other times, other members of the board, particularly the CEO and the chairman, need to draw people out. That's true, male or female. If the people on the board, nobody can just sit there, but we have to make sure we get everyone's opinion.
And that's the great point that you made earlier about great leaders, is they invite people in and they ask the questions.
Yes.
Versus, okay, that's all we got to say, you're moving on to the next topic and the next piece of the agenda, to stop, and if somebody hasn't weighed in, and they haven't maybe weighed in a while, touch base with them.
That's right. And that you have to do. Otherwise, the person shouldn't be there, because they're there for a reason, because they bring a skill set. Now, granted, when you're having an audit committee meeting or an audit discussion, and the person who's very fluent on markets and clients, they may not chime in, and that's okay. So it's being wise to what people are going to bring to the discussion.
So any tips, advice, thoughts for the young leaders of today?
Well, I always say to young people when I get asked this question, I think there are 3 rules that I live by. Number 1 is work hard. Nothing great usually happens to people that don't put the time and energy into their jobs and their careers. So work hard and be committed. The second is commitment to lifelong learning. What we know today is not going to carry us in 3 years, certainly not in 5 years. We have to continue to evolve as business, or as any kind of executive, any kind of individual, contributor, executive, leader, manager. And the third thing is probably the most important, and that is have a positive attitude, be optimistic. And we all know that only you control your attitude. Nobody else can control your attitude. It is up to you how you respond to circumstances, any kind of situation, good or bad. And so everyone has to work on controlling their attitude and figuring out a way to keep upbeat, regardless of what's going on around them.
Thank you for sharing that. Yes, you have to work hard and be committed. If you're looking to grow and achieve, you have to show up with the commitment too.
Yes.
Lifelong learning. I was just came out of a meeting, and we talked about how business has advanced, shifted, and changed in the last 10 years. And it's not done.
No, it's going to continue.
Exactly. If you want to stay in the business world, you have to be willing to see and how things are evolving and changing. And I can't agree more. Having a positive attitude, showing up as the forever optimist, the glass is half full, what could we create?
Yeah. I mean, within reason, you have to be optimistic but you also have to be wise and reasonable about it. So there is one other thing I wanted to add. It's really, in a way, it's geared more towards women, Ivy, but I always think of young people and trying to get their point across. And today more than ever, have data to support your arguments. And I tell young people this because, and I used to say it mostly to young women, because if a woman came into a meeting and talked anecdotally, there's a possibility people might say, oh, well, it's emotional. That's what she thinks. But if the same woman came in with data and supported her position, the whole discussion changes. And so I think it's really important. And, today with everything being data driven, I think it's even more important that when you're coming in to talk about something, especially something important, maybe where you're looking at a budget, you're looking at an investment, have data to support your position. It makes the whole conversation so much easier.
And it gains a level of respect. It shifts an idea to something that's actually can be implemented.
That's right.
Because you have the facts behind it versus just the idea.
That's right.
Love that. How could people know more about you?
They could come to they could go to LinkedIn, of course. We all go to LinkedIn. They can come to the Williams Lee website. They can listen to this podcast. And I think, there are lots of opportunities to speak at conferences. And I think, I do that, you do that. People get out and talk to people. I'm not going to write a book. It's not that interesting. My career hasn't been that interesting. It's been very interesting to me and so much fun. I've met and I continue to meet some amazing people. And that's the great part of being in business today, just the people you meet. And I've run global businesses for a long time. So meeting people from around the world and realizing we're all the same. We just speak different languages, but actually we want the same things for ourselves and our family. Good job, good livelihood. And so, yeah, that's the way you meet people, is just getting to know them a little bit through work and learning who they are.
Well, Claire, I cannot thank you enough for taking time to join us here on Her Success Story. Listeners, you want next week's episode, when you subscribe, it comes right into your inbox on Monday mornings. Don't forget to subscribe to Her Success Story and continue to share it forward. Let us know some comments. What did you think? What do you want to hear? What are you curious about? Thank you, and wishing everybody a fabulous day.